In 25 BCE, a one-eyed queen looked north at the most powerful empire the world had ever seen.
In 25
and she did not
BCE,
Her
a
name
one-eyed queen
was Amanirenas.
looked north
She
at
ruled
the most
Kush,
powerful
the
empire
kingdom that
the
stretched
world
along the
had ever
Nile,
seen.
south
In 25
of Egypt.
she did not blink.
And when Rome demanded
Her
her
name
land as
was
tribute,
Amanirenas.
she answered
She
with
ruled
an
Kush,
army
the empire
instead.
that stretched
Welcome
along the
back.
Nile, south
In
of
25
Egypt.
tonight we travel
when
to
Rome
Meroe,
demanded
a
her land
land
as
years
tribute,
after Cleopatra's
she
Egypt
ruled Kush,
fell into
the
Roman
kingdom
hands.
that stretched along the
Tonight
Nile.
we are not walking
25
through
tonight
quiet
we
markets
travel
or peaceful villages. Tonight we walk into a war that Rome did not want the world to
Tonight
remember.
we are not
Because a
25
woman with one eye won it. Settle in. Close your eyes when you are ready. The story begins now. When Cleopatra died and Egypt became a Roman province, Rome believed the entire Nile Valley was now within its reach. The new governor of Egypt, a man named Gaius Petronius, looked south toward Kush the way a man looks at land he has already decided is his. Kush had ruled itself for centuries. It had produced the black pharaohs who once sat on Egypt's own throne. It had no intention of becoming anyone's province. Amanirenas was Kush's Kandake, its ruling queen, not a queen mother in name only, but a commander who led armies in her own right. She ruled alongside her husband, Teritekas, and when he died, she carried the kingdom forward herself, with her son, Akinidad, at her side. The Romans who wrote about her afterward could not hide their discomfort. The geographer Strabo described her as a woman of masculine bearing, blind in one eye, as if her missing eye were the detail that most needed explaining, more than the fact that she had beaten them. Rome's attention was elsewhere for a moment. Petronius marched much of his garrison east toward Arabia, chasing a different ambition entirely. And in that gap, Amanirenas moved. Kushite forces swept north into Roman-held Upper Egypt. They struck Syene. They struck Elephantine. They struck the sacred island of Philae, where Egyptian priests had worshipped for 1,000 years. Roman garrisons that had assumed Kush was a settled matter found soldiers at their gates who did not agree. The attack was fast, coordinated, and humiliating for Rome, in a way few Roman provinces ever managed to be. And then Amanirenas did something almost theatrical in its meaning. Among the Roman monuments in the captured towns stood a bronze statue of the Emperor Augustus himself, the master of the known world, the man who had personally overseen Egypt's fall. Kushite soldiers tore the head from that statue. In 25 BCE, a one-eyed queen looked north at the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, and she did not blink. Her name was Amanirenas. She ruled Kush, the kingdom that stretched along the Nile south of Egypt. And when Rome demanded her land as tribute, she answered with an army instead. Welcome back. Tonight we travel to Meroe, in the years just after Cleopatra's Egypt fell into Roman hands. Tonight we are not walking through quiet markets or peaceful villages. Tonight we walk into a war that Rome did not want the world to remember, because a woman with one eye won it. Settle in. Close your eyes when you are ready. The story begins now. When Cleopatra died and Egypt became a Roman province, Rome believed the entire Nile Valley was now within its reach. The new governor of Egypt, a man named Gaius Petronius, looked south toward Kush the way a man looks at land he has already decided is his. Kush had ruled itself for centuries. It had produced the black pharaohs who once sat on Egypt's own throne. It had no intention of becoming anyone's province. Amanirenas was Kush's Kandake, its ruling queen, not a queen mother in name only, but a commander who led armies in her own right. She ruled alongside her husband, Teretekas, and when he died, she carried the kingdom forward herself, with her son, Akinidad, at her side. The Romans who wrote about her afterward could not hide their discomfort. The geographer Strabo described her as a woman of masculine bearing, blind in one eye, as if her missing eye were the detail that most needed explaining, more than the fact that she had beaten them. Rome's attention was elsewhere for a moment. Petronius marched much of his garrison east toward Arabia, chasing a different ambition entirely. And in that gap, Amanirenas moved. Kushite forces swept north into Roman-held Upper Egypt. They struck Syene. They struck Elephantine. They struck the sacred island of Philae, where Egyptian priests had worshipped for 1,000 years. Roman garrisons that had assumed Kush was a settled matter found soldiers at their gates who did not agree. The attack was fast, coordinated, and humiliating for Rome in a way few Roman provinces ever managed to be. And then Amanirenas did something almost theatrical in its meaning. Among the Roman monuments in the captured towns stood a bronze statue of the Emperor Augustus himself, the master of the known world, the man who had personally overseen Egypt's fall. Kushite soldiers tore the head from that statue. They carried it hundreds of miles south, back into the heart of their own kingdom. And there, at the entrance of a temple built to celebrate victory, they buried it, face up, beneath the very steps where people would walk for generations afterward. Every foot that crossed that threshold would step on the face of Rome's emperor without even knowing it. It was not simply a war trophy, it was a message written in bronze and sand. Your power ends here, and we intend to remind ourselves of that every single day. Breathe. That bronze head lay buried for nearly 2,000 years before anyone found it again. Let that stillness settle for a moment. But Rome, humiliated, was not finished. Petronius returned from the east to find his province torn open. He gathered his legions and marched south with the full weight of Roman retaliation behind him. This was not a punitive raid. This was Rome reminding the world what happened to those who touched its emperor's image. Petronius pushed deep into Kushite territory, further than any Roman army had gone before or would go again. He reached Napata itself, the old religious capital, the city built in the shadow of the sacred mountain Jebel Barkal, the same mountain where the Black Pharaohs had once believed the god Amun made his home. Petronius took the city. He burned what he could not carry away. It was in this fighting, by most accounts, that Amanirenas lost her eye. Wounded by every measure, in the middle of the war she herself had started, and by every measure she did not stop. Napata's fall would have ended most kingdoms' resistance. It did not end Kush's. Amanirenas withdrew, regrouped, and kept her army in the field. She had already made her point once, in bronze, in blood, and in the space where Rome's confidence used to be. She was prepared to make it again. This is the part of the story that surprises people most. Rome, an empire that rarely negotiated with anyone it considered a lesser power, an empire that had just finished swallowing Egypt whole, chose not to finish the war. You are here. You are safe. The story continues. Amanirenas sent envoys north, not to surrender, but to negotiate. They found the Emperor Augustus himself on the island of Samos, far across the Mediterranean from the battlefield where this whole conflict had begun. And there, face to face, with representatives of a queen he had never met and a kingdom he had never managed to conquer, Augustus agreed to peace on remarkably even terms. Rome dropped its demand for tribute from Kush entirely. The frontier was fixed at a town called Hira Sikaminos, a boundary that left Kush's heartland fully intact and fully its own. Rome, an empire that swallowed Egypt in a matter of months, could not swallow Kush in years of trying, and in the end, simply agreed to stop trying. Think about what that meant in the wider shape of the ancient world. Nearly every kingdom that touched the edges of Roman power eventually became a Roman province, a Roman client, or a Roman ruin. Kush did none of these things. It fought Rome to a standstill, inflicted a wound Rome preferred not to advertise, and walked away from the negotiating table as an independent kingdom, still ruled by the same woman who had started the war. Meroe continued for centuries after Amanirenas, its pyramids still rising from the desert, its ironworks still smelting, its own written script still evolving in ways Egypt's scribes could never read. The Candaces, who came after her, women like Amenishaketo, ruled in the same tradition she had set. Not queen mothers standing beside a throne, but queens who sat on it themselves, who led armies when armies were needed, and who understood that respect from an empire like Rome was not requested. It was taken. And somewhere beneath the temple floor in Meroe, for nearly 2,000 years, the buried bronze head of an emperor lay facing upward in the dark, waiting for the world to remember what a one-eyed queen had done to the most powerful man alive. The ancestors held this, and now you know it too. And so the story rests here for now. Sleep well. Welcome back. Let the day go. Tonight, we travel. We are going back to the 14th century, to a kingdom so vast, so wealthy, so alive with color and sound and story, that the rest of the world could barely comprehend it existed. The Mali Empire. At its height, it stretched across 3 million square kilometers of West Africa. It controlled more gold than any nation on earth, and at its center sat a city that drew scholars, merchants, poets, and pilgrims from every corner of the known world. Timbuktu. Tonight, we are not talking about kings and battles. We are not talking about conquest. Tonight, we walk through the streets. We sit in the markets. We eat the food. We hear the music. Tonight, we find out what it actually felt like to be alive in the Mali Empire. Settle in. Close your eyes when you are ready. The story begins now. Imagine waking before sunrise. The air is still cool. The sky above the mud brick rooftops is just beginning to soften from black to deep indigo to the faintest trace of gold. In a typical home in Timbuktu in the year 1350, you would rise to the sound of the call to prayer drifting across the city. The Djingar Eber Mosque, one of the largest in the world at the time, sat just a short walk from most homes. Your home is built from banko, mud brick, dried hard in the sun, plastered smooth. Inside, the walls are thick enough to keep the heat out during the day and hold the warmth at night. The floors are swept earth, cool beneath your feet. Your family sleeps together in one large room. Woven grass mats, cushions stuffed with cotton. The first task of the morning belongs to the women of the household. Water must be fetched from the well before the heat arrives. Clay pots balanced on the head, an art learned in childhood. The body perfectly upright, the neck strong, the step unhurried. The morning meal is simple, a millet porridge called toe, thick and filling, eaten from a shared clay bowl. No forks, no individual plates. The family eats together, from the same vessel, as they have always done. And then, the city wakes up. By mid-morning, the market at the center of Timbuktu is already loud. Not chaotic, loud with life. Merchants have arrived from across the Sahara. Camel caravans stretching back further than the eye can see, carrying salt so valuable in this part of the world that it was traded block for block against gold. Let that sink in. Salt, the same salt you shake onto your food without a thought, was worth its weight in gold in 14th century Mali. The market sells everything. Cola nuts, bitter, stimulating, shared at every greeting and ceremony. Dried fish from the Niger River, pressed flat and wrapped in leaves. Bolts of cotton cloth dyed in indigo so deep it was almost black. Copper, ivory, books. Timbuktu had bookshops in the 1300s. Scholars estimate there were between 100,000 and 700,000 manuscripts in the city at its peak. History, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, Islamic theology, philosophy. The University of Sankore, founded in Timbuktu, had more students than the University of Oxford at the same time in history. This was not a primitive place. This was one of the most intellectually advanced cities on earth. And in the market, all of that energy pulsed. Merchants haggling in Mande and Arabic and Berber. Musicians playing the kora in the shade of an acacia tree. Children running between stalls. Now, let us talk about the gold, because you cannot talk about the Mali Empire without talking about Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa became ruler of Mali in 1312, and he is, by nearly every historical estimate, the wealthiest individual who has ever lived on this planet. Not the wealthiest African, not the wealthiest medieval ruler, the wealthiest human being in all of recorded history. His personal wealth in today's money is estimated at somewhere between $400 billion and $415 billion. In 1324, he made a pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, a journey of 4,000 miles. He did not travel quietly. His caravan included 60,000 men, 12,000 enslaved people, each carrying 4 pounds of gold bars, 80 camels, each carrying between 50 and 300 pounds of gold dust. He gave gold away to the poor along the route, to the rulers of cities he passed through, to the mosques he visited. He gave away so much gold, in Cairo, in Medina, in Mecca, that he flooded the Mediterranean gold market. The price of gold collapsed across North Africa and the Middle East. It took 12 years for the economy to recover. One man's generosity destabilized the global economy for over a decade. Back in Mali, the ordinary people of Timbuktu knew their ruler was extraordinary, but life for them was not gold bars and royal processions. It was quieter, and in its quietness, it was beautiful. By afternoon, the heat is at its peak. The market quiets, shutters close, the city rests. This was not laziness, this was wisdom. A relationship with the sun built over thousands of years. You do not fight the heat of West Africa. You work with it. Children nap, women weave. Men gather in the shade of courtyard walls to talk and drink tea. A ritual of 3 rounds, each cup representing something. The first cup, bitter as death. The second, strong as life. The third, sweet as love. No meeting of consequence happened without tea. The griots were active in the afternoons. The griots, the storytellers, the memory keepers, the living libraries of West African society. Every family of standing had a griot attached to them, a person whose entire life was devoted to remembering, to reciting lineages going back 20, 30, 40 generations, to singing the stories of your ancestors so they would never be forgotten. There were no filing cabinets, no cloud storage, no printed books for the common person. There was the griot, sitting in the shade, speaking in a voice trained since childhood to carry history across time. The griot made sure that nothing was lost. Nothing was ever truly lost. As the sun begins to fall and the air cools again, the city breathes. Evening in Timbuktu was a social time. Families moved outdoors. Neighbors gathered. The Niger River, wide and brown and slow, caught the last light of the sun and held it a little longer than anything else. The evening meal was the main meal. Jollof rice, yes, jollof rice is ancient. Fish stew with okra and palm oil. Lamb on celebration days. Everything cooked over open fire, the smoke rising straight up into the still evening air. Music was everywhere. The kora, a 21-string instrument made from a gourd and a cowhide, sounds like a harp crossed with a guitar, crossed with running water. The djembe drum, the balafon, a wooden xylophone whose sound carries across an entire village. People danced, not as performance, as prayer, as communication, as joy. Children were kept close, but not sheltered. They learned by watching, by doing. A girl of 8 might already know how to dye cloth. A boy of 10 might already be apprenticed to a craftsman, a blacksmith, a leatherworker, a weaver. The night came slowly to Mali, and with it came the stars. The Sahara sky above Timbuktu, undimmed by any electric light, is one of the most spectacular things a human being can witness. Stars so thick and close they looked like scattered gold dust. Perhaps that is why they mined it. The Mali Empire began to decline in the late 1300s. Internal conflict, drought, the slow shift of trade routes. By 1600, Timbuktu had changed hands several times. The great libraries were scattered. Some manuscripts were buried by families determined to protect them. Others were carried across the desert on the backs of camels, hidden beneath robes and grain sacks. Many survived. Today, hundreds of thousands of those manuscripts still exist, held in private family collections across Mali, in libraries in South Africa and Morocco, in universities around the world. Scholars are still translating them, still discovering what was written there centuries ago by people who believed that knowledge was the most valuable thing a person could possess. More valuable than gold, more valuable than salt. They were right. The story of the Mali Empire is not a story of what was lost. It is a story of what was built, what was treasured, what was passed on. And tonight, for a few quiet minutes, you were there. You walked through the market. You heard the kora. You sat in the shade and drank your tea. The ancestors held this, and now you know it too. And so the story rests here, for now. Sleep well. In the year 1068, an Arab geographer named al-Bakri sat down to write about a kingdom in West Africa. He had never been there. He gathered his information from traders who crossed the Sahara, men who returned with stories that sounded impossible. They described a king who could summon 200,000 warriors, a king whose palace was decorated with sculptures, paintings, and glass windows of his own design, a king whose dogs wore collars of gold and silver, a king so wealthy that the traders could not find words for it. The geographer wrote it all down and called the kingdom Ghana, but the people who lived there called it Ouagadougou. And by the time al-Bakri wrote about it, Ouagadougou had already been ruling the desert for more than 600 years. Welcome back. Let the day go. Tonight, we travel. We are going back. Back more than 1,000 years. back to a kingdom so rich, so organized, so deeply connected to the world around it that it held power for 8 centuries. The Ghana Empire. Not the modern nation of Ghana. We are going further north to what is now Mauritania and Mali, to a place the outside world barely understood, to a land of gold. Tonight, we are not talking about kings and conquests. We are not talking about battles. Tonight, we cross the desert with a salt caravan. We walk through the markets of Kumbi Saleh. We watch gold being weighed. We sit with the people who made this empire run. Settle in. Close your eyes when you are ready. The story begins now. The Sahara Desert is not empty. It never was. For thousands of years, people crossed it. They moved goods across it. They built networks across it. And by the 4th century, maybe earlier, one group of people began to organize those networks into something larger. The Soninka people. They lived in the Sahel, that band of grassland between the desert and the forest, and they controlled something the rest of the world wanted desperately: gold. West Africa was rich in gold. The rivers that flowed through the region carried deposits that had been washing down from the mountains for millions of years. The Soninka knew where to find it. They knew how to mine it and pan it and shape it, and they understood very early that if they controlled access to it, they controlled everything. By the 8th century, Ghana had become the dominant power in the region. The king, they called him the Ghana, which means war chief, ruled from a capital city called Kumbi Saleh. The city sat about 200 miles north of modern Bamako, on the edge of the desert. It was perfectly positioned. To the south lay the gold fields. To the north lay the desert trade routes. Ghana sat in the middle and collected a tax on everything that passed through. And here is what made Ghana different from other kingdoms. The tax was systematic. Gold that came from the south was taxed. Salt that came from the north was taxed. Every donkey load of goods that entered or left the city was recorded and charged. This was not a raid economy. This was not tribute from conquered peoples. This was trade. This was commerce. This was an empire built on business. But the gold trade had a secret, a practice that fascinated Arab writers and European travelers for centuries. The Soninka miners who dug the gold out of the earth did not sell it face to face. They used what became known as the silent trade. Here is how it worked. A North African salt trader would arrive at a designated location, usually near a river. He would spread his goods on the ground: slabs of salt, cloth, beads, copper. Then he would leave, beat a drum to announce his presence, and walk away. The local gold miners would approach. They would examine the goods. They would place a quantity of gold dust next to each item, what they thought it was worth. Then they too would leave. The trader would return. If he was satisfied with the gold offered, he took it and the deal was done. If not, if he wanted more, he took nothing and left again. The miners would return, add more gold, and retreat. This could go back and forth for days. Neither side ever saw the other. Neither side ever spoke a word. This was not primitive. This was sophisticated diplomacy. Two cultures with different languages, different religions, different customs, and they found a way to trade fairly, repeatedly, across centuries, without a single word. The silent trade kept the location of the gold mines secret. It kept the miners autonomous, and it worked. Now let us walk through the capital itself. Kumbi Saleh was actually 2 cities, separated by 6 miles. The first city was the King's City, a walled royal compound containing a palace, government buildings, and temples. Only the king, his court, and the priests lived here. The palace was built of stone and wood. Al-Bakri writes of sculptures and painted decorations. Around the king's neck hung a necklace of gold and precious stones. When he held court, he sat on a platform surrounded by horses draped in gold-embroidered cloth. Guards stood behind him, holding shields and swords decorated with gold. Even the dogs in the palace wore collars of gold and silver. The second city was the merchant city, 6 miles away. This is where the daily life of the empire actually happened. Muslim traders from North Africa lived here, Berbers, Arabs, in stone houses. They built 12 mosques. They had their own imams, their own scholars, their own muezzins who called the faithful to prayer. The city was alive with languages: Soninka, Arabic, Berber, Mande. The markets of Kumbi Saleh sold everything: salt from the Sahara, gold from the south, textiles from Egypt, leather from the Sahel, copper from North Africa, dates from the oases, cola nuts from the forests, ivory, enslaved people, books. This was not a backwater. This was one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the medieval world. You are here. You are safe. The story continues. Let us talk about salt, because you cannot understand Ghana without understanding salt. In the medieval Sahara, salt was worth its weight in gold. Literally. A block of salt traded 1 for a block of gold. This was not a metaphor. This was the exchange rate. Salt was mined at Tagaza, a desolate place deep in the Sahara, 500 miles north of Ghana. Nothing grew there. The miners lived in houses built of salt blocks with roofs of camel skins. They ate dates and camel meat brought by the caravans. Their entire existence revolved around digging slabs of salt from the earth and sending them south. For the people of West Africa, salt was not a luxury, it was survival. In the tropical heat, the human body loses salt through sweat. Without it, muscles cramp. The brain cannot function. You die. And in the deep interior of West Africa, far from the ocean, there was simply no salt to be found. So the caravans came. A single camel could carry about 400 pounds of salt in 2 large blocks. The journey from Tagaza to Kumbi Saleh took 3 weeks across open desert. Caravans typically included hundreds of camels. The logistics were staggering. Water had to be carried or found at oases. Guides had to navigate by stars and landmarks. Bandits had to be avoided, and the desert killed anyone who made a mistake. But the caravans kept coming, because at the other end of that 3-week journey was gold, and the math worked. Now let us leave the caravans and the kings and the markets. Let us walk away from the center of things. Let us go to the villages. Most people in the Ghana Empire were farmers. They grew millet and sorghum, the grains that fed West Africa for thousands of years. They raised cattle, goats, and sheep. They fished in the Senegal and Niger rivers. They wove cotton cloth. They made pottery. They built their homes from mud brick and thatch, the same materials their ancestors had used for generations. Life followed the seasons. The rains came between June and September. The fields were planted. The young men took the cattle north toward the desert to find grazing. The women tended the gardens near the village: okra, peppers, onions. The children helped with the animals. At harvest time, the whole village worked together. Then came the dry months: dust, waiting, the rhythm of the year. Religion was woven into everything. The Soninka believed in a supreme creator god. They called him Bida, the great serpent, and a world full of spirits who lived in trees, rivers, stones, and ancestors. Every village had elders who communicated with these spirits. Every important decision, when to plant, where to hunt, how to resolve a dispute, involved the spiritual world. The Muslim traders who lived in the cities brought Islam. The king allowed them to practice freely. Some of his own officials converted, but the countryside remained firmly connected to the old ways, to the spirits of place, to Bida. This coexistence, Islamic cities, traditional villages, lasted for centuries without conflict. Another example of Ghana's genius for managing difference. Nothing lasts forever, not even an empire of gold. By the late 11th century, the very time al-Bakri was writing his descriptions of Ghana's wealth, the empire was already under pressure. The Almoravids, a militant Islamic movement from the north, began pushing into Ghana's territory. They captured the salt mines at Tagaza. They harassed the trade routes. Around 1076, they may have captured Kumbi Saleh itself. But it was not conquest that ended Ghana. It was the land. Centuries of farming had depleted the soil. The Sahel is a fragile environment. The grass that held the earth in place was overgrazed. The trees that provided shade and retained moisture were cut down. The desert crept south, slowly at first, then faster. The farmers moved. The villages shrank. The trade routes shifted east toward the rising powers of the Niger River, toward a place called Mali. By the early 1200s, Ghana was no longer an empire. The city of Kumbi Saleh emptied. The gold mines passed to new rulers. The caravans found new destinations, and the kingdom that had ruled the desert for 8 centuries faded into memory, kept alive by the writings of Arab geographers, by the stories of elders, by names carved on stones, buried under sand. But the idea of Ghana did not die. When the modern nation of Ghana gained independence in 1957, its first president, Kwame Nkrumah, deliberately chose the name. Not because the ancient empire was in the same place. It was not. He chose it because Ghana, in the memory of West Africa, meant greatness. It meant sovereignty. It meant a people who built something that lasted. And so, we return. From the gold markets, from the silent trade by the river, from the salt caravans crossing the desert under the stars, from Kumbi Saleh, the city of kings and merchants and 12 mosques, from the villages where women ground millet and children ran after goats and the spirits lived in the trees. The Ghana Empire lasted 800 years, 8 centuries of trade and governance and cultural exchange, longer than the Roman Empire, longer than most nations have existed, and it was built not on conquest but on connection, on the understanding that gold and salt, north and south, desert and savanna could meet and exchange, and both sides would walk away richer. The ancestors held this, and now you know it too. The story of the Ghana Empire does not end in ruins. It ends in the name of a modern nation, in the memory of a people, in the realization that Africa's great empires were not exceptions to history, they were history. And so the story rests here for now. Sleep well. Welcome back. Let the day go. Tonight, we travel. We are going back more than 4,000 years to a kingdom that rose along the same river as Egypt, that built more pyramids than Egypt, that conquered Egypt itself, and that the world somehow forgot. The kingdom of Kush. Long before the pharaohs of Thebes and Memphis claimed the Nile, long before the pyramids of Giza touched the sky, there was a civilization to the south, a land of gold and iron, of warrior queens, of temples rising from the desert like prayers made stone. Tonight, we are not talking about conquest. We are not talking about pharaohs as you know them. Tonight, we walk through the palm groves of Kerma. We stand before the pyramids of Meroe. We hear the Nile as it sounded 4,000 years ago. We find out what it felt like to be alive in the kingdom of Kush. Settle in. Close your eyes when you are ready. The story begins now. Imagine the Nile. Not the Nile of the Egyptian delta, wide and flat and tamed by centuries of irrigation. The Nile farther south, wilder here. The river cuts through bands of granite and black volcanic rock. There are cataracts here, 6 of them, places where the water churns, white against stone, and boats must stop and portage. The first cataract, just south of Aswan, was the traditional border between Egypt and the land the Egyptians called Tarseti, the land of the bow. We know it now as Nubia, and at its heart, the kingdom of Kush. The air is drier here than in the delta. The heat is different, sharper. The acacia trees cast thin shadows. The doom palms bend toward the river. The soil near the Nile is black and rich. Away from the river, it turns to gold sand and red rock within 100 paces. Everything that lives in this part of the world lives because of that narrow band of green along the water. In the morning, the rising sun hits the eastern desert first. The sand glows pink, then orange, then a white so bright it hurts to look at it. By the time the light reaches the river, the fishermen are already on the water. Their boats are made of bundled papyrus reeds, the same design their ancestors used 1,000 years before. They cast nets woven from palm fiber. The Nile perch here grow large. The crocodiles grow larger. The people of Kush learned to read the river the way their northern neighbors read the stars, knowing where the current hit a sandbank, where the hippos gathered at dusk, where the water ran deep and cold even in the hottest months. The land itself taught patience. The annual flood came later here than in Egypt, and it was less predictable. The Kushites could not simply wait for the river to do the work. They built canals. They dug reservoirs. They learned to read water as a language, and they built their first great city at a place called Kerma. Kerma was not a small settlement. By 1700 BCE, it was one of the largest cities in the Nile Valley, Egyptian-controlled territories included. The city stretched for more than a kilometer along the river. Its center was dominated by a massive mud brick structure known today as the Western Defufa. Defufa is a Nubian word. It means a building of unburned brick. This single structure rose 3 stories high, its walls sloping gently inward as they climbed, the architecture distinctively, unmistakably Kushite. Not Egyptian, not borrowed, their own. Imagine approaching Kerma from the river. The Defufa would have been visible for miles across the flat floodplain. Inside its walls, narrow staircases led to upper chambers. Religious ceremonies took place here. Processions, burials of the city's rulers in great tumulus graves that spread outward from the Defufa like ripples in water. Some of these burial mounds were 90 meters across, larger than many Egyptian pyramids of the same period. The people of Kerma were master potters. Their ceramics were so fine, so distinctive, tulip-shaped beakers with red polished exteriors and black interiors, that archaeologists can trace Kerma's trade routes simply by finding their pottery. And they found it everywhere, in Egyptian tombs, in Levantine ports, as far east as the Red Sea coast. Kerma did not simply trade with its neighbors, it dominated trade. Gold from the eastern desert, ivory from the south, ebony, incense, leopard skins, ostrich feathers, and iron ore. The kingdom of Kush sat at the crossroads of Africa, and it grew wealthy beyond anything its northern neighbor was comfortable with. In a Kerma home, the morning began as it has begun in the Nile Valley for 10,000 years. Water drawn from the river or the well just as the sky begins to lighten. A fire kindled. Porridge of millet or sorghum stirred in a clay pot. Bread baked flat on hot stones. The household was the center of everything. Extended families lived in compounds of interconnected rooms, their walls painted with scenes of cattle and river life. Cattle meant wealth. Cattle meant status. The rulers of Kerma were buried with thousands of cattle. The rulers of Kerma were buried with thousands of cattle skulls arranged in crescent patterns around their tombs, an offering of a scale that still staggers the archaeologists who uncovered them. And then, around 1500 BCE, Egypt came south. For 500 years, Egypt ruled northern Nubia. They built temples, they extracted gold, they assumed the land of Kush would remain a colony forever. They were wrong. By 750 BCE, Kush had rebuilt. Its new capital stood at Napata, near the holy mountain of Jebel Barkal, a flat-topped sandstone formation rising alone from the desert floor. The Kushites believed this mountain was the southern dwelling of the god Amun, and from this sacred place, a king named Pa looked north and saw a divided Egypt, weak pharaohs, warring factions, a civilization that had forgotten itself. Pa did something extraordinary. He did not invade Egypt as a foreign conqueror. He invaded Egypt claiming to restore it, to bring back the old ways, the old gods, the old order that Egypt itself had abandoned. He wrote his own account of this campaign, carved onto a granite stela that still survives today. He described himself not as a Kushite claiming Egyptian land, but as a true pharaoh, reclaiming what was rightfully his. And he won. His son, Taharqa, ruled an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean coast to the confluence of the Blue and White Niles. More than 2,000 miles. Taharqa built temples at Karnak. He restored monuments that had fallen into ruin. He added columns to the temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal, columns that still stand, their hieroglyphs still sharp in the desert light. He is mentioned in the Bible in the Book of Kings as the king who marched out against the Assyrians. The Black Pharaohs, as they are remembered today, were not a historical footnote. They were the last great native dynasty to rule Egypt before the Persians, before the Greeks, before Rome. Walk through Napata at its height, the temple of Amun at the base of Jebel Barkal, its approach lined with ram-headed sphinxes, priests in white linen moving between the columns, the scent of myrrh and acacia smoke, the Nile close enough to hear, the mountain rising above it all, sandstone glowing red in the afternoon sun. A scribe sits in the shade, reed pen in hand, recording the day's tribute. Gold from the eastern mines, cattle from the southern herds. A woman grinds grain in the courtyard, the stone turning, the rhythm older than memory. This was not a kingdom on the periphery of something greater. This was the center. The Assyrians eventually pushed the Kushites back south. Napata faded, but the kingdom of Kush did not fall. It moved. The new capital, Meroe, sat between the 5th and 6th cataracts, in a region where the Nile bends east and the rain falls more generously than in the desert to the north. Meroe had iron. The hills around the city were rich in iron ore. The Kushites built furnaces, they smelted, they forged. Meroe became one of the great iron-producing centers of the ancient world, its slag heaps still visible today, mounds of black waste that testify to centuries of industry. And at Meroe, the kingdom reinvented itself. It developed its own script, Meroitic, a written language that scholars are still working to fully decipher. It developed its own architectural style, and it buried its kings and its queens in pyramids. The pyramid fields of Meroe contain more than 200 pyramids, more than Egypt, smaller than the Great Pyramids of Giza, yes, steeper, sharper, built of sandstone blocks and covered in smooth plaster that once gleamed white against the desert. At their bases, small offering chapels decorated with relief carvings. Some of those carvings depict women ruling alone, the Candaces, warrior queens. The word Candace, Kentake in Meroitic, was not a personal name. It was a title, the Queen Mother, the ruling queen, Amanirenas, Amanishaketo, Shanakdakete. These women led armies. They negotiated with Rome. They appear on temple reliefs, standing over bound captives, their proportions regal, their presence absolute. When the Roman Emperor Augustus demanded tribute from Meroe after a border conflict, the Kushites sent him a bundle of golden arrows. The meaning was clear. The word Candace, Kentake in Meroitic, was not a personal name. It was a title, the Queen Mother, the ruling queen, Amanirenas, Amanishaketo, Shanakdakete. These women led armies. They negotiated with Rome. They appear on temple reliefs, standing over bound captives, their proportions regal, their presence absolute. When the Roman Emperor Augustus demanded tribute from Meroe after a border conflict, the Kushites sent him a bundle of golden arrows. The meaning was clear. Walk now through Meroe at its height. The iron furnaces smoke on the eastern edge of the city. The temples and palaces cluster near the river. The pyramid field spreads to the east, a city of the dead watching the city of the living. In the royal palace, the Candace holds court. Her advisors include generals, priests, and scribes who write in a script that Egypt cannot read. Outside, the streets are busy. Merchants from the Red Sea coast arrive with spices and glass. Herders bring cattle from the Botana grasslands to the east. A potter shapes clay on a wheel that spins as it has spun for 2,000 years. A child learns to write Meroitic on a shard of broken pottery, the first letters of a language that will one day puzzle the world. The kingdom of Kush did not fall in a single battle. It faded. Trade routes shifted. The kingdom of Axum rose to the east. By 350 CE, Meroe was no longer a capital. The pyramids stood empty. The furnaces went cold. The Meroitic script was forgotten, its last inscriptions carved and then left to the sand. But the pyramids did not disappear. They are still there. More than 200 of them scattered across the desert of northern Sudan. Less visited than the pyramids of Egypt, but no less real. The pyramids of Meroe catch the same sun that rose over Kerma 4,000 years ago, that rose over Napata when the Black Pharaohs ruled the world, that rose over the Candaces who answered Rome with golden arrows and silence. The kingdom of Kush was not a footnote to Egypt. It was a civilization in its own right. It built cities when most of the world lived in villages. It smelted iron when others still fought with bronze. It produced kings and queens who saw themselves not as imitators of a greater power, but as the inheritors of something uniquely, completely their own. And tonight, for a few quiet minutes, you walked there. You stood at the Defufa, You heard the Nile at Kerma. You watched the furnaces burn at Meroya. The ancestors held this, and now you know it too. And so the story rests here. For now, sleep well. In 25 BCE, a one-eyed queen looked north at the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, and she did not blink. Her name was Amanirenas. She ruled Kush, the kingdom that stretched along the Nile south of Egypt. And when Rome demanded her land as tribute, she answered with an army instead. Welcome back. Tonight we travel to Meroe, in the years just after Cleopatra's Egypt fell into Roman hands. Tonight we are not walking through quiet markets or peaceful villages. Tonight we walk into a war that Rome did not want the world to remember, because a woman with one eye won it. Settle in. Close your eyes when you are ready. The story begins now. When Cleopatra died and Egypt became a Roman province, Rome believed the entire Nile Valley was now within its reach. The new governor of Egypt, a man named Gaius Petronius, looked south toward Kush the way a man looks at land he has already decided is his. Kush had ruled itself for centuries. It had produced the black pharaohs who once sat on Egypt's own throne. It had no intention of becoming anyone's province. Amanirenas was Kush's Kandake, its ruling queen, not a queen mother in name only,